Pastor Ryan here. We come to our fourth week of a Wesleyan Catechism. We've had the introduction, and then we went over the 10 Commandments, and then last week we looked at the first commandment. This week we'll look at the second and the third commandments. So we have question 7 and question 8 from the Catechism before us. What is meant by the second commandment? Wesley says in his explanatory notes of the Old Testament, in commenting about Exodus 20, he says the second commandment is concerning the ordinances of worship, or the way in which God will be worshipped, which it is fit himself should appoint. It is right for God to tell us how to worship him, not for us to tell God how we desire to worship him or how we will worship him. God is the object of our worship. He is the one who is worthy to receive our worship, and he is the right person, the right one to tell us how we should worship. Here is one, the prohibition. We are forbidden to worship even the true God by images. First, the Jews, at least after the captivity, the Babylonian captivity, thought themselves forbidden by this to make any image or picture whatsoever. It is certain it forbids any making of an image of God. For to whom can we liken him? God is the creator. Everything else is created. And so God is so much other, so worldly different, so vastly different than anything created that there's nothing that we could make as an image that would do him justice. For who shall we liken him to? And Wesley here mentions Isaiah 40, 18 and 25. It also forbids us to make images of God in our fancies as if he were a man like we are. Our religious worship must be governed by the power of faith and not the power of imagination. Well, what is the difference between the power of faith and the power of imagination? The power of faith has to do with spirituality. It has to do with the reality of spiritual matters, of spiritual beings that exist, that we put our hope in what is unseen, not in what is unreal. God is real. The angels are real. Demons are real, even if they are unseen. So faith has to do with where we put our faith, or where we put our hope, rather, and that is unseen, that is real. Now, the power of our imagination has to do with our fancy. It has to do with what we conjure up. It has to do with make-believe. And whatever we make believe about God is false, and it is wrong for us to make believe and pretend that is worship. Secondly, Wesley says they must not bow down to them, show any sign of honor to them, much less serve them by sacrifice or any other act of religious worship. When they pay their devotion to the true God, they must not have any image before them for the directing, exciting, or assisting their devotion. Though the worship was designed to terminate in God, it would not please him if it came through an image. We worship God directly, not through any intermediaries. For I, the Lord Jehovah, thy God, am a jealous God, especially in things of this nature. It intimates the care he has for his own institutions, the displeasure against idolaters, and he resents everything in his worship that looks like or leads to idolatry. I just have to stop here and give pause to the fact that while God was giving these commandments to Moses on Mount Sinai, Aaron and the Israelites were forming their own idol. This golden calf, as Aaron collected gold and made a calf, made this idol. And he visits the iniquity of the fathers, or a generation, mothers and fathers, upon the children into the third or fourth generation, severely punishing. Nor is it an unrighteous thing with God if the parents died in their iniquity and the children tread in their steps when God comes by his judgments to reckon with them, to bring into the account of idolatries their fathers were guilty of, keeping mercy for thousands of persons, thousands of generations of them that love me and keep my commandments. This intimates that the second commandment, though in the letter of it only a prohibition of false worship, yet includes a precept of worshiping God in all the ordinances which he hath instituted. So here it's not just that we don't make a graven image, it's that we're careful and cautious to be sure that we don't use any image as an intermediary that may lead even to idolatry. Instead, the first commandment requires, or this commandment requires as the first commandment, that inward worship of love desire, joy, hope. So that this outward worship of prayer and praise and solemn attendance of his word, they go hand in hand. We don't just go through the motions. Our worship is not just a husk. It's not just an outer shell, but rather it is the outward demonstration of the affections of our heart, affections of love, desire, joy, and hope in God. This mercy shall extend to thousands, much further than the wrath threatened to those who hate him, for that reaches but only to the third or the fourth generation. Many of us may say it's unfair if God would visit the sins of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. But look at the point here. And look at the differentiation between the justice and the wrath of God and the mercy of God. That his mercy extends to 1,000 generations for those who love him. And here we come to question 8. This will be the second half of today. What is meant by the third commandment? The third commandment is concerning the manner of our worship, where we have a strict prohibition. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord our God in vain. Supposing that having taken Jehovah for their God, they would make mention of his name, this commandment gives a caution not to mention it in vain. And it is still as needful as ever. So Wesley here lines out 5 ways in which we take the Lord's name in vain. First, by hypocrisy, by making profession of God's name, but not living up to that profession. Secondly, by covenant breaking. If we make promises to God and perform not to the Lord our vows, we take his name in vain. Thirdly, by rash swearing, mentioning the name of the Lord or any of his attributes in any form in an oath, without any occasion, not any just occasion for it, but for no purpose or no good purpose. Fourthly, by false swearing, which some think is chiefly intended for the letter of the commandment, or in the letter of the commandment. Okay, so we can limit all of our vain speak of God, taking the Lord's name in vain, perhaps just to this fourth, this false swearing, but Wesley obviously places it as a portion of and not the totality of the prohibition which we have. Fifthly, by using the name of God lightly or carelessly. The profanation of the form of devotion is forbidden, as well as the profanation of the forms of swearing, as also the profanation of any of these things whereby God makes himself known, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless. Magistrates that punish other offenses may not think themselves concerned to take notice of this, but God, who is jealous for his own honor, will not connive at it. The sinner may perhaps hold himself guiltless and think there's no harm in it. To obviate which suggestion the threatening is thus expressed, God will not hold him guiltless. But more is implied, that God will himself be the avenger of those who take his name in vain, and they will find it a fearful thing to fall in the hands of a living God. We are not to take the Lord's name in vain in any of these ways. We have to be careful in the ways in which we use God's name and we proclaim God. And likewise, we are not to make graven images of God. We are not to prop up idols for ourselves in place of God, or even as an intermediary to get to God, lest we encourage idolatry or encourage an avenue that may lead to idolatry. God bless.